So we have House Bill 108. Is this Representative Spillane's? Senator Apprentice, could you introduce 108 for Representative Spillane? He will not be here. Oh, are you?
Good morning, members of Senate HHS. Chair Birdsell, I am here on behalf of the House and Representative Spillane to introduce House Bill 108. This came out of Children and Family Law. This is relative to the confidentiality of reports made to the Division of Children, Youth, and Families and requiring guardians ad litem to be appointed in certain instances. So Representative Mark Pearson for the majority of the Committee of Children and Family Law says nearly every state has laws which penalize individuals who knowingly make false statements of suspected child abuse to the relevant department, courts, law enforcement agency, or social services agency. This bill seeks to add New Hampshire to that list. Those who sincerely make a good faith report that proves erroneous are protected. That was a vote of 9-7 in the House. Representative David Bickford for the minority for Children and Family Law for many years. The legislature has been apprehensive about having those suspected of making false reports to the Division of Children, Youth, and Families. This bill allows those suspected of false reporting to be prosecuted with criminal charges. This legislature in the past has felt this would have a chilling effect and deter people from reporting. And with that, I will close the introductory statements on behalf of Representative Spillane and defer my questions to those in the audience. Thank you very much.
All right, can we have Beth, is it from DCYF? Is it, what, how do you say, Smargian, or is it Beth S?
Excuse me, it's Beth S. Margison. I'm the legislative liaison for DCYF, and I apologize. I've yet to learn how to write my name clearly, and I apologize sincerely.
Well,
I am here to provide information to this committee on this bill. The majority report on this from Children and Family Law is correct in that the majority of, there is a lot of jurisdictions, perhaps a bare majority, that does criminalize false reports of child abuse. We currently do not have that in the state of New Hampshire. But going through the bill, the division has highlighted, would like to highlight some, I would say, concerns or just some information on how it's drafted. So in the first section on on lines 9 through 14, that is pretty clear about the complaint being made maliciously or with intent to harm. But yet, when you go down to the new section 2, which are lines 22 to 26, you'll see that there's talk there about knowingly making false reports. That's on line 22. And then again, if you skip down to line 25, any person who knowingly or in bad faith makes a false report. So there's some internal inconsistencies as to the language on those lines. The other thing is that we're not sure. I mean, it does define that the criminal penalty would be a misdemeanor, but we don't know what the civil penalties are. Those don't seem to be, these are not laid out in this legislation. The last thing is in section 2, which is the 170 G8A section at the bottom of page 1, and that continues on to page 2. The concern with this section is that it defines that a person who knowingly makes a person who makes a complaint in good faith, that will be kept confidential. And so it seems counterintuitive, but that section, if this were to go forward in its current state, we would ask that section 2 and 3 be taken out, because the reality is that a person who in good faith makes a report can be brought into our proceedings under 169C for adjudication of an abuse and neglect case. And that is allowed under the current statute. And if a good faith reporter were always kept confidential, that could interfere with the division bringing its own cases under 169C. So if this were to go forward today, I think that we would ask that sections 2 and 3 be taken out. We have ways of handling the names of reporters in 170 G8A, which is actually set out in that statute. And there really is no need to sort of confidentially keep good faith reporters separate from bad faith reporters. There's a statutory scheme for that in 170 G8A. The other thing that I noticed is that this is only refers to child abuse. It does not abuse to child neglect. Our statute is an abuse and neglect. So, in summary, Section 1, there's some internal inconsistencies with the language there. Sections 2 and 3, we would respectfully ask to be taken out if this were to go forward. That would not hinder this legislation in any way, and it would allow the division to handle the reporters' names in the way that is already set out in 170 G8A. And I'll be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Any questions? Senator Abard?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And were these issues brought up in the House?
We did bring these issues up in the House. And I honestly don't know what happened in the exec session with that. But we did raise all of these same concerns in the House.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you.
And just one more thing, and I just realized this. I should have wrote these things down. It's also not clear how the division would report a bad faith report. The CPSWs are not really trained to do investigations onto bad faith reports, so their sort of assessment of a bad faith report and the division's reporting of it is also not laid out in this legislation.
You're saying, can you repeat that?
So our CPSWs are trained to assess referrals for abuse and neglect. Whether or not that referral, sometimes they're unfounded, but the report was made in good faith. I think for us to try and figure out whether or not it was made in bad faith or malicious is difficult because that's not what the CPSWs are trained for. We're not really sure from this legislation who we would report that information out to in order to bring a criminal prosecution. Who brings the civil penalty right of action for it? We don't know.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Keith Clooney, welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Keith Kinning. I'm the Advocacy Director at Waypoint. We sit in opposition of this bill. I'll give you some of our concerns. We also believe this could have a chilling effect. We want people to call in to DCYF when they have any concerns whatsoever, even if they're not sure what's going on. It's up to the CPSWs and DCYF to figure out whether the child's being abused or neglected. And we're just fearful that it's going to make people hesitate. If they hear that there are criminal penalties out there, that if there's intent, we're not sure people are going to understand the difference between intentional or wrongful. And so for this reason, one of the reasons we oppose the bill. We also oppose the bill because, as Beth just said, this turns CPSWs into investigators. And most of you probably know that a lot of our CPSWs come out of UNH. They're trained. They go through, I believe, Beth can either shake her head yes or no, a 6-month training period. And they're learning how to, spot abuse and neglect. They're not trained to be lawyers to figure out what the intent of the person is. You already have a staff that's understaffed, overwhelmed, many cases, and then you have CPSWs now trying to figure out whether the person intentionally or unintentionally made a false statement. We also support all the concerns that she brought forward regarding the contradictions within the bill. And we have particular concerns also about the criminal penalties. I handed out my testimony. I see Senator Prentice has it right here. There are alternatives to the criminal aspect of it that are done in other states. So if you want to take a look at that, rather than me go through it and waste your time, you can easily read this. So for these reasons, we oppose the bill at this time, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Chair Bertzel, and good morning, and thank you for your testimony, Ed. And I may have missed this earlier, and without the prime sponsor here to talk about how we got here, do we know, like, the number of cases where this is even suspected that false reports have been made? I mean, is any data gathered on this? Like, what's behind bringing this forward?
We did, Emily Lawrence, who's Deputy Advocacy Director, looked into this. We tried to find out whether there was any statistics showing whether this suppressed people calling in. We tried to look in, we couldn't find anything along those lines. What we found was the same thing that DCYF found, was that there are other states that have a bill similar to this. But I do think the bill needs a lot of work, and needs a lot of help to move this forward. But I'm not aware of anything like that.
Okay,
Thank you for the question.
thanks. All good, thank you.
Any other questions?
I do.
Senator Avard?
So, I happen to know of families that have been falsely accused, and their world was turned upside down when they were falsely accused.
Yeah.
And they do exist. What is the remedy for those people whose world has been turned upside down, devastated because of a false accusation? In my opinion, yes, there is a question. In my opinion, not only is the accused hurt, but also the children are devastated and used as tools, as weapons. What is the remedy then?
So thank you for the question. I believe that people can weaponize this law. I do believe that. But not this law, but I mean the law that currently exists about abuse and neglect. But I think, Senator, how we feel about this is you're balancing the right to need to protect children from abuse and neglect versus the state's desire not to have a current law weaponized. And that is a tough balance. We would say that if you're going to have to make a choice between that, we'd rather have the children, make sure that the children that people call in and that the children are protected. That is where we are on this. That may not be the answer you want, but that's where Waypoint is, which is we believe that the weight should be to make sure that there is no chilling impact and that people feel free without any second thought to call into DCYF to report abuse and neglect.
So you heard the changes that Beth had suggested. Are you on board with that?
Yes, yes.
Would you be willing to work with Beth to put forth an amendment for us?
Sure. Happy to work with DCYF.
Beth, would you be willing?
Well, the changes that we asked for that just sections 2 and 3 be dropped out.
That's it?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't know how to, without knowing exactly what is.
Let me get out of your way.
Okay.
I think in general, the sections 1 here need work and some work with the sponsor to see what the intent is and fully fleshing out. Without that, I without talking to the sponsor and seeing exactly where they want to go, I don't feel like I could I could amend this language. For sections 2 and 3, it would be simply just removing them from the
Okay,
legislation.
well, I just got a volunteer. Senator Avard will be working on an amendment to try and address the issues.
Okay, all right.
So, Thank
you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Chair Bertzel. So I in no way support false reporting. And if there's a way that we can do this, I'm just trying to understand, my question was trying to understand the scope of the problem. And it's a pretty routine thing that I do, is try to understand how we got here. But I would just want to make it clear that if there's a way that we can fix this and, push back against false reporting, that I'm not going to get in the way of that. I don't support it. Okay, thanks.
The last question, actually, that Senator Avard asked, do you as a organization keep any record or any statistics on false accusations?
We do not. We do not.
Okay, thank you. All right, is anyone here that would like to speak on House Bill 108 that has not been given the Oh, sure.
Thank you, Senator. I want to make clear also Waypoint does not support any kind of false report. No, I mean, you know, I just want to make clear on that. It's a balance. We understand that.
Okay, great. All right. Seeing that, I will close the hearing on House Bill 108, and we will move on to House Bill 323. We will give the CAM a little bit of time to We have 1 minute. I didn't realize it was 9:20, not 9:15. What are we going to do with all this time? Okay. Okay. Obviously, we will not be executing 108 today. All right, I will open the hearing on House Bill 323, and I invite Representative Pearson up to introduce his bill. Welcome.
Thank you, Senator Birdsell and other senators. For the record, my name is Representative Mark Pearson, Rockingham 34, which includes the great and marvelous town of Hampstead. I now chair the Children and Family Law Committee of the House. Here's the background on this bill. Last term, the late and much beloved Representative Catherine Rogers sponsored House Bill 1290 FN to establish a task force on precision medicine and biomarker testing. This bill was heard by the House Committee on Health, Human Services, and Elderly Affairs, which I then chaired. The decision was made to refer the bill to the Joint Legislative DHHS Oversight Committee, which I also chaired and still do, so as to expedite the matters by appointment of a special subcommittee. I named to the chair of this subcommittee retired epidemiologist and representative from Lee, Dr. Jeffrey Soloway, now retired from the House, but then a member of both Health and Human Services Committee and the DHHS Oversight Committee. So he brought his wisdom as an epidemiologist, and we added a few physicians to this subcommittee, and their job was to flesh out what Representative Rogers really wanted. The subcommittee made its report to oversight on June 24, and its recommendations became the basis for this term's House Bill 323, which is before you. To quote both the subcommittee's report and House Bill 323, medical technology is an advancing effort based on emerging science. As technology advances, the state must assess its role in the facilitating the development and distribution of both preventative and curative technologies. At the same time, the state has an obligation to provide oversight of activities which have the potential to harm, mislead, or cheat vulnerable citizens, end quote. This bill establishes a committee on emerging medical technologies to do these things and make such recommendations. The scope of the committee's work is outlined in the amended bill before you. Appropriately, the committee shall report its findings and any recommendations for legislation to the House and Senate Health and Human Services Committees, to the DHHS Oversight Committee, the House Speaker, Senate President, and Governor. Dr. Soloway named the Oversight Subcommittee's final report the Rogers Report on Precision Medicine. passing this bill to establish the Committee on Emerging Medical Technologies will both do the people of New Hampshire a great service, but also honor Representative Rogers for her years of service. And I have written testimony for everyone.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Just, I do have a question. So what type, when you say emerging medical technologies, can you give me a for instance?
No. At the medical center in Kingston, which I run, I'm in charge of budget and things like that, and leave to my people downstairs anything having to do with patient care. But I understand there are new things coming along, new procedures, new medicines, new techniques, and all of this. And we need to keep an eye on it as an interface between the people and the professions, since some of this will wind up or should wind up in legislation. But I can't give you a for instance.
Well, I just got a hand raised from Representative Edwards.
We've been tag teaming around the two buildings this morning, so I will yield
He
all
will-
my remaining time to him.
He will be next. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you. Senate Representative Edwards. Welcome.
Yeah, this is my crossover ceremony. You know, I wasn't going to shave unless we got a budget, so. Good morning. I'm Representative Jess Edwards, representing Rockingham District 31. That's Auburn, Chester, Candia, and Sandown. I'm in a previous life. I'll tell you something relevant about this particular bill. In a previous life, I was the deputy program manager for the Department of Defense telemedicine test bed, and we migrated from being the telemedicine test bed to being the Medical Advanced Technology Management Office. And in that role, we had basically, we were part of the Research and Development Command at Fort Detrick. And in that role, the communities, the research communities in medical technology came to know us and would come and present to us because of that. And they would talk about over the horizon technologies that they wanted us to work with them to pilot and see if we could find a practical application for it on the battlefield or even in peacetime care. So I worked with that sort of environment for quite a while. And when I was appointed by Representative Pearson to participate in the subcommittee of the oversight that took a look at the biomarkers, it became apparent as we looked at it that if we were just to focus on biomarkers over the longer term, that would be too narrow, because we have different technologies coming at us from all over the place. What's new in the media these days is artificial intelligence. Well, in the mid-90s, I was going to conferences explaining how the transformation of radiology from film-based to digital-based was going to open up a new wave of medical capability to where we could write artificial intelligence that would go in and take a look at an image, a medical image, and determine whether or not there was an abnormality. And as it turned out, relatively rapidly, mammography started to benefit from artificial intelligence, where the software algorithm would take a look at the image, and mammos are very hard to interpret because if it's a dense breast material, it's hard to tell the difference between a calcification and something worse. So this algorithm would assist the physician to determine whether or not that was a real problem. So that is one example to your question, Senator Birdsall. The technologies are as broad as our medical technology can be, AI is a big one. Other big ones are getting into gene therapies. If you take a look at the concerns around our Medicaid budget, there is an explosive cost potential related to new innovative drug therapies interventions that are extremely expensive at an individual cost basis. What kind of rules does the legislature want to develop to help guide the investment in those kinds of very expensive one-off kind of approaches? Under what scenarios? What are the ethics? What are the costs? Those are the kinds of things that the legislature has not yet had to determine, but we can imagine having to determine it in the next term or the term thereafter. And every one of these technologies, like AI, if you listen to, any of the news, AI is a scary thing. It's going to kill us all. Well, it also has the potential to do really great things to help us diagnose and manage treatment for patients. So the reason I think we need this committee is we need to develop expertise and thought leadership within the legislature so that as these things present themselves, that we have some people who are representative of our public who know what the issues are and can help provide subject matter leadership. Now, this is all theory. It worked at the federal level. I don't know if it would work at the state level. So what we did was we tried to take a minimalistic approach and say, you only have to meet basically once a term, go get feedback. And if there's nothing there that you really need to look at, you don't have to have a subsequent meeting. Alternatively, if it's a target-rich environment where we've got some interesting things going on, the chair at his or her discretion can schedule future meetings. So it is going to adapt to an ever-changing environment. And if we're all just wrong, this thing sunsets in 2028, and it would require an act to keep it going. So if we're wasting people's time, we just go away. Otherwise, it can be continued.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike Roll? Welcome.
Thanks, Senator. For the record, I'm Mike Rollo. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, and I am one of the reasons that House Bill 1290 was brought forward by Representative Rogers in the last session. She sponsored it for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. And the goal of the legislation back then, and it was to study the access to biomarker testing. We have a number of volunteers with our organization that have had issues accessing biomarker testing. And for those of you that don't know what biomarker testing is used, a biomarker is part of your body that is used to determine, in this case, what the best course of treatment will be to fight whatever specific type of cancer that you have. Cancer therapies that are being developed recently in the last 10, 20 years are more targeted therapies. The traditional drip chemotherapy that everyone thinks about when they think about going through cancer treatments still exists and are still used. But a lot of the new technologies that are being developed are targeted therapies that require additional testing to make them more effective. And part of that is using biomarkers, using your body's tissues to see how they will respond, how these therapies will respond, so that they're effective. So you're not wasting your time and resources, and the health system's time and resources. So we had a number of volunteers that were having issues accessing this testing. Now, for certain types of cancers, breast cancers, colon cancers, biomarker testing is standard. Now, for melanoma, for instance, if Senator Bradley was here today, I could tell him a story about one of his constituents in Silver Lake, whose doctor discovered that she had melanoma. She was ordered to do a biomarker test. Doctor did it. They determined what the best course of treatment was. They thought it was covered by insurance. A few months later, she got a $9,000 bill in the mail. It's, you know, it's a tough thing to swallow. She paid it because she was able to, but she was able to access this life-saving treatment, and she's doing very well now because of she went through the biomarker testing. We went through biomarker testing. So we see this as an issue of access to biomarker testing. So we asked Kathy Rogers, who had been at that point my friend for 24 years, who was going through cancer herself, and I explained to her what was going on. And she said, "Oh, you know, I had to go through biomarker testing myself, and I think it's awful that someone might not have access to that, and we should study it. We should look at what the barriers are." I also should mention that it's rather apropos that this committee is hearing this bill this week, because on Monday was the year anniversary of Kathy losing her battle with cancer. So anyways, the Representative Pearson did a wonderful job explaining to you what the process was. In the end, they discovered that, yes, it was a much larger issue. They really needed to have another committee to look at a larger issue of emerging medical technologies. They thought there was more to it than just that. We applaud that and we support that. But why am I here? If you look at page, I need my glasses too, lines 11, 12, and 15, expanding access to clinical trials in both academic and community settings. This was not part of the original language. We fully endorse that. Anything we can do to expand access to clinical trials is a wonderful thing in this state. I'm sorry, line 11, and then 12, and then 15. So 11 is number 1, expanding access to clinical trials in both academic and community settings. Clinical trials most often fail nationwide because they don't have a diverse pool of folks in them. So anything we can do to expand access to them will be a benefit to society as a whole. Obviously, the role of biomarkers, which is what our original intent was, so why I'm sitting here. And then, in general, number 15, removing barriers for access for emerging medical technologies, of which I would include biomarkers, because the standard of care for some breast cancers, as I mentioned, is to order a biomarker test. But as new tests become available, they may become the new standard of care. Now, that isn't true for all cancers, and it isn't true for all different diseases. It's not just for cancer. This could be for a number of diseases. So I only represent, cancer. I mean, other people could be sitting behind me representing other organizations. I don't know, but so it's very important. We always find that technology far outpaces insurance laws in the state or any statute, right? So anything we can do to try to keep ahead and make recommendations, I think is going to be a benefit to our state. So, and that's why we're here, and we would fully support it.
Thank you. So basically on line 15, you want to add the biomarkers?
Oh, no, it's already in there, Senator. So that's line 12. It says it says the role of biomarkers, and I'm glad that it says it specifically, but I mean, it's line 15 also covers it because it is an emerging medical technology, but I like the fact that it says it separately too, because I don't want it to be forgotten, because that really was what the bill was put in to begin with. I don't want it to get lost.
So you don't want to specifically on line 15, removing barriers to access for emerging technologies, including biomarkers. I was going to add that in there.
I don't think we have to, Senator, because
Okay.
on line 12, Representative Leon amended the bill and added a few things, and she made sure to keep the role of biomarkers in there for us, so it didn't get lost, and we greatly appreciated that.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time.
That was our last speaker. Is there anyone here that would like to speak on House Bill 323 but was not given the opportunity? With that, I will close the hearing. And when Cam is ready and the chair is ready, we'll open 426. Oh, sorry. You ready? Okay. All right, I am going to open the hearing on House Bill 426. And is the prime sponsor here? I welcome Representative, how do you, Roche?
Rochefort, yeah.
Rochefort.
Yes, for the record. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is David Rochefort. I represent Grafton 1, Littleton, Lisbon, Lyman, Monroe, Bath, Sugar Hill. I'm also a vice president of the New Hampshire Board of Pharmacy, and actually that's where this bill originated. We as the board requested this bill, and worked with a number of stakeholders over the last 6 to 8 months to get it to where it is now. So just a little background on where we're here. The state started licensing pharmacies back in 1922, right at the beginning of Prohibition. I think there was probably a reason why that was, because pharmacies were able to get alcohol. So, so what better time to license an entity than that? So over the course of 100 years, the law has been changed and adjusted a number of times. But one of the things that was common early on, and even until probably 30 years ago, was many times the pharmacies that were licensed in the state were run by the owners of the pharmacy. So when the legislature started licensing the pharmacies, they wanted to know who is in charge. So they came up with a position called the pharmacist in charge. So when a pharmacy gets a permit from the state of New Hampshire, there is also a statutorily defined pharmacist in charge, who, if you read the statute, is ultimately that one individual is responsible for the overall operation of the pharmacy. Well, fast forward to 2023, where there's very few pharmacies that are owned by a pharmacist working there. We still have that position, and they're statutorily obligated to make sure that all the operations of the pharmacy fall on them. But the reality is they don't have the authority to do that. So for instance, you've got a pharmacy, XYZ Discount Pharmacy, and by law they have to make sure that it's a fit place to practice and make sure the staffing is there, the physical structure is there, but they don't have the authority to call a roofer and fix the roof. They don't have the authority to call a plumber to fix a plumber. Go to a situation we had within the last year where we had a healthcare facility that was experiencing massive diversion of drugs from another department of the hospital, of the facility. And ultimately, the way that the law is written, the pharmacist in charge was held responsible for that, even though they had no authority over the other departments within the hospital. So 426 really is, it modernizes, it really kind of reflects the way business is done now accurately. It ensures that the people who are making the decisions are held responsible for the decisions, and we're not holding somebody responsible who has no authority to make certain decisions. Just for the record, like I said, we started working on this about 8 months ago. We've worked with all kinds of stakeholders within the state, hospitals, pharmacists, different trade associations, and we're we've got consensus that this is the right direction to go. And then lastly, I'm going to add, where New Hampshire is not alone in doing this. This is the trend nationally, appears to be getting that separation, making sure the permit holder is held responsible, not an individual who doesn't have the authority. Maryland, Idaho have done it. Most recently, Vermont changed their rules within the last year to do this. So, yeah, that's the background, and that's really the nuts and bolts of what this bill will do.
Any questions from the committee? Oh, I do.
Sure.
So in a case where, let's say a Hannaford and they have a pharmacy, so we're getting rid of the pharmacist in charge. Is each pharmacist responsible for their own?
Absolutely. And actually, in the previous hearing brought up a wonderful point in that technology has allowed us to be able to track every movement and every action within the pharmacy. So if there is a mistake, we can find out where the mistake was made. And if you look at the bill, it's page 2, line 4. We added that section to ensure that any licensee, so if it's a pharmacist who makes a mistake, the board of pharmacy still has the ability to hold that individual responsible
So every pharmacist is responsible for their
for
own
their own
actions.
actions. Correct. Yep.
Okay. Any questions? All right,
Great. Thank you.
thank you. Robert Thoreau? No. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. My name is Bob Terrio. I'm, that's all right. I get called many things. I'm currently the chair of the Legislative Committee for the New Hampshire Society of Health Systems Pharmacists. We represent the practicing interest of pharmacists in New Hampshire. I'm also the director of pharmacy and the pharmacist in charge at Wentworth Douglas Hospital in Dover. And as you can see, I do have a managerial title as director of pharmacy. So the Society is fully supportive of House Bill 426. As Representative Rochard noted, the bill is antiquated. It was designed when a single person was in charge of the pharmacy. I am part of a large enterprise system of 13 hospitals. Most of the decisions related to my pharmacy are done at a corporate level, and I have little control over that. We're part of, like I said, that 13 hospital setting. I report to a vice president of patient care services. So I report to a non-pharmacist who also participates in those decisions. The way the current law is written too, my pharmacy license is held accountable. So if my organization was to violate a pharmacy practice or rule, it would be attached to my license. I, in theory, could lose my livelihood to practice as a pharmacist. You know, I might be a lousy manager, but a really good pharmacist. And so I could lose my livelihood based on kind of decisions that are made at the corporate level. So the rule is really antiquated. One of the things that the law does is creates a permit holder. And so the permit holder, it establishes that employer-employee relationship. As I said, I can be held accountable for pharmacy practice because I'm a licensed pharmacist, but the decisions of the organization will be held at the permit level. So, an example of a letter in the hospital setting right now, to administer chemotherapy, we have to have clean rooms. These clean rooms, the HVAC systems cost millions of dollars to create negative pressure. Well, we have rules in pharmacy about United States pharmacopoeia, and I have to comply with those rules and airflows. But I have no authority to spend that $1 million to get my clean room up to spec. So I fully support the legislation and, moving to the permit holder and freeing up the pharmacist in charge. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you. Our last speaker on this is Kathy Thunberg. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Kathy Bizarro Thunberg. I'm the Executive Vice President, New Hampshire Hospital Association, representing all 26 acute care hospitals as well as all specialty hospitals in the state. The New Hampshire Hospital Association is in full support of House Bill 426. I just will emphasize the components of the bill. It removes the term pharmacist in charge from statute, adds the new definition of permit holder, and aligns proper responsibility of pharmacy operations to a permit holder while still ensuring that licensees, registrants, and certificate holders are personally responsible for their scopes of practice. The bill also ensures that the Board of Pharmacy's definitions of misconduct and oversight of disciplinary actions are properly attributable to permit holders, licensees, registrants, and certificate holders. Under the current statutory framework, all responsibilities of a pharmacist are assigned to the pharmacist or the PIC, which includes the operations of the pharmacy, their own scope of practice, and those of others who work in and with a pharmacy. Many times, operational decisions, as you heard, are to how to run the pharmacy are made elsewhere, but not by the PIC. And yet, the pharmacist in charge has been held solely responsible by the board. We believe properly aligning pharmacy operations as the responsibility of the permit holder and allowing individual professionals to be responsible for their own actions and their scope of practice is the most appropriate way to structure pharmacy and pharmacy operations. So we urge you to support House Bill 426 and happy to answer any questions that you have.
Any questions from the committee? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There is no one, it looks like there's no one in opposition. Is anyone here that would like to speak on House Bill 426 that was not given the opportunity? With that, I will close the hearing on House Bill 426. Do you want to go into exec?
So moved.
Is there a second? Senator Prentice. Second.
To pass on this last bill, 426.
Oh, Senator Avard moves on to pass. Senator Prentice seconds. Any discussion? Yes.
I thank you, Chair Burzel. I just wanted to add, this is, although it doesn't date back as far as, 1922, this is actually the way that we operate EMS licensing in the state. There's the unit itself and there's the individual providers.
Yep.
So it makes sense, it works, and I'm glad to see this being updated properly. Thank you.
Great. All those in favor of ought to pass, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Consent?
All those in favor of consent, say aye. Opposed?
I'll take it up.
Senator Avard will take it out.
Can we do 426 too? I will take.
Yes. Do you want to?
I
No.
move on to pass on H.
Wait, no. We just did 426. You're
I mean,
talking 323.
320,
Do you want to do 323?
Move
Alright.
on to pass on 323.
Second?
Put my-
Same. Senator Avard moves on to pass. Senator Prentice seconds. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor of ought to pass on 323, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent?
Consent?
Senator Whitley moves consent. Senator Avard seconds. All those in favor of consent, say aye. Opposed? All right, Senator Prentice, you want to take this out?
Absolutely.
All right.
Move on to exec.
Sure. Do you want to do a couple more?
We have to.
Do we, what time? We have till 10. Or do you want to wait till after we're done to do some of the other ones? Okay. I'm gonna have to follow up on who's doing what here. Or Marie will kill me. It's okay. Yes, Marie uses my folders to fill out your folders. All right, how about, 342? We will not be doing 642. My understanding is that they're working on an amendment, the stakeholders. So we'll give them a couple of weeks. All right, Senator Whitley moves on to pass, Senator Prentice seconds. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor of ought to pass on 342, say aye.
Aye.
I'll second. Okay. Senator Whitley moves consent, Senator Prentice seconds. All those in favor of consent, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I'll take it out.
Senator Whitley will take it out. How about 217? Senator Bradley moves ITL, Senator Prentice seconds. Wow. I did call him yesterday and tell him what our plan was. Got the blurbs already done.
That
I
is
know.
like next level.
All right, where are we?
So
ITL.
Senator Bradley has moved, Senator Prentice has seconded ITL House Bill 217.
Okay. Any discussion?
So I'd just say, look, normally I wouldn't have a problem with the study committee, although we do have. Normally I wouldn't have an issue with a study, although we do have a lot of study committees. I think in this case, I'd want to see medical professionals making recommendations on fluoride if there is new CDC and NIH data before we, have a study committee, and I think that's a better way to go.
Okay. The motion is inexpedient to legislate. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
I will take this one out. Okay, I've already spoken to all of you on Senate Bill. Why don't we hold off on 500? I have an amendment. Oh, you do too?
Consent language.
Uh-huh.
Same consent language, but we have that prepared just so that I'd like to see this, the same consent language used bill to bill if we can.
Yep.
Once it's already been agreed to and voted on the Senate floor, I just brought in that language so we can consider it today.
Okay.
Or today or whenever we're gonna do it, okay?
Okay, I'm thinking my plan, the three bills that are going to be amended, because we're done after today on bill hearings. So I'm going to give the members of 640, the people that are working on the amendment on 642 and the one we heard today, give them a couple of weeks. And then we'll meet, not next week, but the week after, and then just exec the rest of it. Is that okay with everyone?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so why don't we hold off on 500?
Okay.
And did everybody get a copy of that?
No, I just brought it in.
Okay.
It is what we, I'll pass it out. Do you want me to pass it or wait for me? The state language we adopted. on the Senate
You can
version,
pass.
so the-
You can pass it out.
Thanks.
All right.
Actually, that's all I need. Oh. Yeah, we're happy. Oh, no, it's Bradley. What's the friend? It's Bradley Carson. Got it. Then pull that language.
All right. There's one away. Oh, that's the one here, making on. Yeah. All right, why don't we move out of? Second. Okay, so this is for 500, right?
This should be for 500. This wasn't for, it's the one. GOP controls 500.
Okay,
And I can have OLS prepare that. This one needs to have it for today.
all right.
Is this what we adopted on 238 or is this what? Oh, okay.
It is.
Yeah, it is.
Does that include, my language?
No, this is just the consent language.
Okay,
Not the medical records.
need to fill that out. All right. We still have 2 minutes, so you need to take a rest, take a rest. Like we only have one speaker on this one. Or two at one time. Okay. 426. And that, all of these are consent, right?
The first three are.
426 is all to pass consent.
Yep.
323,
Ought to pass consent, Senator Prentice.
Three 24. That's consent. 342.
342. Ought to pass consent, Senator Witt.
Yep. And this one, 217 was 4-1.
ITL 401, Senator Byrd.
Okay.
If I had gold stars, you get one.
Always get gold stars.
I mean, I would still like to get gold.
Yeah, I know.
That's why I'm the type A.
Yeah.
They were so special.
Who doesn't like gold
Who
stars?
doesn't like gold stars?
I didn't get very many gold stars.
Oh no.
We had
This is
nuns.
shocking. Oh, that's bad.
I put my put the new one away. All right, we are going to. It is now just after 10. We'll open the hearing on House Bill 408 and the prime sponsor. I'm sorry, I put my folder away. Representative Cole. Welcome. Got it. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you, members of the committee, for hearing my testimony. For the record, my name is Jim Kofalt. I represent Hillsborough County District 32, representing the towns of Wilton, Temple, and New Ipswich. RSA 170E 34 addresses requirements for the conditions in foster care homes. Before I continue any further, I want to point out that the title of this bill is a bit misleading. It refers to relative to foster children and vaccinations. In fact, this bill addresses children who are not foster children living in foster homes and the adults living in those homes. So I'll explain a little bit how this came to be. So RSA 170E 34 stipulates that the Commissioner of Health and Human Services shall adopt rules relative to minimum standards for licensing childcare facilities and foster homes. And one of those rules specifies that if a foster home is caring for a child under 6 years old or a child with special medical needs, then all children who are household members shall be up to date on immunizations consistent with ACIP, among other groups. And essentially what this has done is it has created a mandate that differs widely from that which exists for other children throughout the state. This raised concerns particularly when the CDC added the COVID-19 vaccine to the ACIP recommended schedule, and that in turn created a de facto COVID-19 mandate for certain children. So if it's a natural born child or an adopted child living in a foster care home that is caring for a child under 6 or with special medical needs, then that immunization requirement kicks in. And there are a number of other immunization requirements that apply to those children in those homes that do not apply to other children in the state. Furthermore, the religious exemption is not allowed under this rule. This rule stipulates that the only exemption allowable is a medical exemption. So when this issue was raised with DHHS late last year, they did introduce an emergency rule because they were concerned, as I am, that given the shortage of families willing to serve as foster families, that some of the concerns about mandates might dissuade people from participating in the program. And I know I have spoken to several people who have in fact said that this was a deal breaker for them. So what this bill does essentially is to say that people living in foster care homes would be subject to the exact same requirements as anyone else in the state. The emergency rule that was introduced back in November essentially said the DHHS was going to acknowledge that they don't want to impose a statewide mandate on people living in foster care homes for the COVID vaccine specifically. And that rule is set to expire very soon. I am not sure what their intentions are with respect to creating a permanent rule to that effect, but I know that the emergency rule expires after 6 months and, as I understand, cannot be renewed. So essentially that's what this bill is intended to address. I have heard the counter argument that foster parents are voluntarily participating in the program. While that's true, this is causing some people to rethink that, and I think that's a concern, as we really need good foster families to care for these children. I will also note that this bill passed out of the Health and Human Services and Elderly Affairs Committee on the House side unanimously with an ought to pass recommendation, and then passed on consent through the House. And with that, I will take any questions.
Senator Bradley.
I'm just trying to understand the practical application of this. So if you are a family and you have, let's say you have 2 kids of your own.
Yes.
And you have 2 foster kids all living in the same household.
Mm-hmm.
If you didn't have the foster kids, the two children of your own could not, they could take advantage of a religious exemption or a health exemption.
Correct.
So, but if you had foster kids under the rules now, the kids that were your kids could not take advantage of the religious exemption. And that's what you're trying to fix?
Well, mostly yes. I'll explain that it's not just if they have foster kids. If they have foster kids that are under 6 or have special medical requirements, and furthermore, it's not just about the religious exemption. It's about the fact that we have a limited list, and I think DHHS has been very constrained in adding new rules to introduce new immunization requirements. So we have a fairly short list. It's a subset of the ACIP recommended schedule, which is required in New Hampshire, some under statute, some under rule. So we're requiring a subset of the ACIP recommended schedule. The concern here is that the children we're talking about are subject to a much broader spectrum of immunization requirements than other children in the
The
state.
foster children.
No, not the foster children. Well, actually, some of the, it gets complicated. I'm right now talking about the non-foster children living in the
Right.
home.
It would be your children potentially.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And so they are subject now to the entire ACIP schedule, not just the half a dozen or so that are currently required for every child in the state.
Even if you didn't have foster children.
If you didn't have foster children, they would be subject to the same requirements as everyone else.
Right.
And what this bill is essentially trying to do is to say, let's make them subject to the same requirements as everyone else. So instead of this long list that's recommended by ACIP, let's acknowledge that in the state of New Hampshire, we've said that there is a specific
list.
shorter list
Got
that
it.
is required.
Okay.
And instead of saying that there is no religious exemption, let's also allow them the religious exemption.
And the problem is just, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around this, and I apologize.
It gets complicated. It really does.
The families that would take on foster kids that also have their own children don't want to do it because it would subject their children to more requirements
Correct.
than they're subject to.
Correct.
That's the, okay.
Yes.
Now I have it. Thank you.
Any questions? Senator Apprentice.
Not necessarily a question. Thank you. Good to see you again. This past summer, and actually Senator Avard and I sat on a study committee with Representative, I always call you
Kofalt.
Colfat. instead of
Kofalt.
Colfelt. I know.
Everybody
it's a-
does. That's
It's a
fine.
jazz thing. But this was where we were able to like see the problem here and discuss the separation of the two. So it is complicated, but it is all about, as Senator Bradley said, your own, like if I brought foster children in, then my own daughter would be subject to those same requirements, whether I wanted to do that or not. And so that's the issue.
So I'll add one more bit of detail, which is that the foster children living in the home are also subject to that long list of requirements. However, they are specifically exempt from the COVID vaccine because of the Freedom and Immunizations Act, or the statute that was passed in the last biennium. So again, it gets very complicated as we dig into the details of that. But this is intended to simplify and just say, let's have everyone subject to the same rules. Thank you very much.
Abby Rogers and Beth Morganson. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Beth. Oh, geez. Sorry about that, committee members. I am Beth Margison. I am the DCYF General Counsel and Legislative Liaison. And
Hi, good morning. Abby Rogers, Legislative Liaison, DPHS.
so we're here together because Abby is the vaccination person and I'm the DCYF person. So we figured that this is a better handling of this issue. So just to clarify a few things. So it's not DCYF's understanding that the vaccination requirements are an impediment to foster parents and getting foster parents. So the foster parents, when they decide to be foster parents in our system, are subject to much more rigorous health and safety inspections, fire inspections in their homes, even more so than us as normal residents of the state of New Hampshire and actually, having our own children in our homes. In terms of the vaccination requirements, the children in the biological children of foster parents in a foster home are already subject to the same requirements as any other school child in the state of New Hampshire. There is no additional requirements of vaccines for them, specifically for COVID-19 and for flu vaccines. As Dr. Benjamin Chan testified in front of this committee, those are recommendations. They are not requirements. In terms of because they're going to be seasonal, and in terms of the COVID-19 rule that Representative Kofalt referenced, that was an emergency rule. It is becoming a permanent rule. We have asked for a waiver for that from the federal government, and I think Abby has a little bit more information on that.
Thank you. So when ACIP included COVID-19 as a recommendation for child schedule, it was added in anticipation for the end of the public health emergency on May 11th. So that vaccine could be added in the Vaccine for Children program, which would be at no cost for children that need it in the future. So that was the first reason. When that was added, the department undertook emergency rulemaking to exempt families from having to have the COVID-19 vaccine. That rule was an emergency rule that expires on May 20th of this year. The department is readopting that rule, and that is currently scheduled for a public hearing on May 4th. So we look forward to hearing from foster families at that time on that legislation and that rule.
And in terms of the last sentence of this paragraph, which is that no provision of this because now we're moving from children to the adults in the home. No provision of this subdivision, no rule adopted by the department governing the license of foster family home shall impose any vaccination or immunization requirements on any adults residing in a foster family home or household. So the issue is that the division has already sought for so there's national model foster care standards. We have already sought and received 2 waivers from the federal government for those. One is for the exemption of the COVID-19 vaccine, and the other is for having children under 6 years old, the vaccination requirements for under 6 years old. If this were to go through and we were to exempt all foster adults from having vaccines, we would likely lose our funding. We would not, because we would be, again, almost completely out of step with the national model foster care standards. And then there is, and I'll let Abby speak to this, the incredible concern about medically fragile infants going into foster homes where there is not vaccination by all the individuals in the home against pertussis and whooping cough. And I will let her deal with that issue.
Sure. Thanks, Beth. Currently under federal licensing statute as well as state, if a foster family would like to have a child in their home that is an infant, it's required that family members or caregivers have up-to-date pertussis, which is the whooping cough vaccination, unless medically contraindicated. I mean, a foster family, if you can't have the whooping cough pertussis vaccine, then that is a medical exemption that is allowed as for foster families. Also for children, many children in foster care have special medical needs and they're placed with families. In that case, those families or caregivers have to also have a seasonal influenza vaccine as well to protect those children. And just to share that the vaccination requirements for foster families is basically put in place for the protection of the foster child. Many foster children come to foster families with incomplete vaccination or incomplete vaccination records. So it serves as a safety net really for that child to come into the family and make sure that their family is safe and they're not going to be contracting a communicable disease. The other piece that I just wanted to share, I reviewed our rule before coming here today, and for children for children over 6 years old, all children are required to be up to date on their vaccination unless they're exempted under 141C20C, which allows for a medical and a religious exemption. So if you have a child over 6, then that religious exemption does apply to you.
So for all of these reasons, we ask you not to support this bill. The division is opposed to it on the grounds that Abby and I have spoken of. We have a very hard time finding foster homes. If this were to go through and we were not allowed to, we would not allowed to be able to place a lot of medically fragile infants in foster homes. Also, we do want to note that, the foster parents are amazing people who step up and actually do all of the things that we ask for them above and beyond what any of us do in our own homes. And they also do have, they are, as parents, knowingly allowing their parents to be vaccinated, their children to be vaccinated. That is a choice that they have made. And we're here to take any questions if you have any.
I thought I had it on. I apologize. You mentioned Dr. Benjamin Chan. Did he testify on this?
He did, in front of the Health and Human Services and Elderly Committee. We were all there.
In the House, correct?
Yes, in the House.
And follow. And you both testified in the same way in the House as well.
We did, but this last sentence here was an amendment that was put on by the committee. So we actually did not have that information when we testified.
And you had mentioned that, follow, I apologize. And you had mentioned that if this goes through, you would have trouble finding more foster parents. But isn't it that also the flip side of the coin? If foster parents are not treated equally, and I think that's what this is trying to do, couldn't you also be at risk at losing people signing up to be foster parents if their children are going to be forced to be vaccinated?
We have not found the vaccination requirements a barrier to getting foster parents. And Abby would like to add something to that.
Thank you for the question. The other piece that is interesting to note is if the additional immunization requirements for caregivers, that would be pertussis and influenza, is only for foster families that take into their home infants or medically fragile children. So if a foster family did have issues with vaccination, at least those two, they could decide that they wanted to just host children in their families age 6 and older.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Prentice.
Thank you, Senator Chair Birdsall. I was just working through because when we worked on this or discussed it this summer, we had parsed out the children of foster parents, where your own children, and then bringing foster children in, where that problem was. The adult provision has been amended on here, was not, I don't recall that as being part of the discussion, and I think I'm supportive of the first part that we had talked about this summer. This part is problematic, so I don't know what to do. Just being honest, so let's talk about it.
We won't probably be executing this today, so I do have a question. So if you're saying that you have a request to the feds to extend your rule, is that correct?
The feds have already approved that. We're just putting it into rulemaking now. We've received a waiver for that.
To follow these most of this guideline except for the adult?
No, not this guideline. Not this guideline. Our own guideline for COVID and for the COVID vaccine itself. And I'll let Abby actually. So
Sure.
no, not this bill.
Sure. So the waiver is to exempt the COVID vaccine. And the rulemaking in New Hampshire is also to codify that in rule that we will not require the COVID vaccine for foster families or foster children, foster families.
So if the foster child is already, we understand that there's a requirement for the foster child to be vaccinated. Why would we worry about the foster parents' children?
So if a child has multiple foster placements and then comes to a home and maybe has, not an adequate record of vaccination, they're missing vaccinations, or the provider cannot verify doses of vaccination, then only birth parents can give authorization for foster children for vaccination. So if the foster parent is not available, doesn't want to give that consent to protect their child from communicable disease, the state has a recourse to get a court order. But in lieu of that, it's basically as a protective measure for the child in the home that may be under vaccinated to support their family environment with adequate protection and immunity.
Well, if the birth parent is the only one that can give the authorization, then, that foster child goes into foster care, foster family, who gives the authorization?
So what Abby was saying was that when the child initially goes into the home, if the child is under vaccinated, the fact that the entire foster family is vaccinated really helps that child, because there's a serious protective factor. For the foster child, the parent does give consent. I don't have any statistics as to how often with consent is withheld, but generally it's part of our ordinary medical care when they come into our care.
Shouldn't the foster children, before they go into foster care, be vaccinated so that they're protected no matter what household they go into?
Sometimes it's an emergency placement. We have to get them into a foster home very quickly. So, and if they're preschool children, they're not subject to the vaccination requirements. So sometimes we will find that children, when we bring them into care, are under vaccinated.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add in as well, that both parents can choose a medical exemption for their child, and they don't need to have those vaccinations going into the home, but it still serves as a protective measure if you're not vaccinated. Foster parents have a lot of, as Beth mentioned, a lot of licensing requirements. They have to have a posted escape route for fire. They have to have home inspections and provide their medical information to the state to be licensed as appropriate providers for childcare, and as their parents can't take care of them right now for themselves. So it's really a protective measure to kind of wrap around and have the child protected in the home from communicable disease.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any other questions? Senator Prentice?
Yes, thank you, Chair Bristol. The federal, the waiver that you're looking for, that you applied for, would that make, in talking about that, does that make all or some of this not necessary? Is that part of what I'm hearing?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Except, but the last sentence is beyond the waiver.
Yeah, so if we just took the last sentence out and the initial, what was introduced.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
If I could just share, I do have a comment on that. So I know in the sponsor's intent was to mirror the RSA 141C20C, which are the school and child vaccination requirements for school and child care. So under that law is required diphtheria, mumps, pertussis, polio, rubella, and tetanus. We also have 3 vaccination requirements in rule, which are not mentioned here. So if if the intent is to mirror everything that's in 141C20 for school and child care, then we would also like to include varicella, hepatitis B, and Hib, which are in rule.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, there it is. For the record, I'm Representative Kelly Potenza. I represent Rochester wards 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. I was very active when this went into place. So it was HEC 6446 from the JL car. And so I still have, of course, all of my testimony that was given back then. So I'm going to read just so we can be all reminded about what took place in June of 2020 with this. I strongly object to the foster family rule, HEC 6446, that mandates vaccines for children and adults. This mandate violates my health freedoms. No individuals in New Hampshire should be forced to have any vaccine injected into them. It violates the health rights we have to choose our own therapies, along with violating our personal and religious rights. There is no statutory authority to impose these vaccine mandates on children and adults in a foster family household. Federal law, the Family First Prevention Services Act, only requires that state licensing standards need only be reasonably in accord with recommended standards of national organizations. Recommending but not requiring vaccines would be reasonable in accordance with the recommended standards. The purpose of HEC 644602 is to, quote, support permanency to reduce the risk of a child being exposed to circumstances that might further trauma experienced by the child. This rule will result in the loss of many foster homes and many children being further traumatized. I'm making an aside. The previous testimony basically said that this didn't impact. That is absolutely not true. And I can give you guys all of this information if you would like it. I will give you 10 families that decided that they were not going to foster children at all because this went into place. That basically their rights, the discrimination that was against them and their families for them deciding that they didn't have any religious rights, but everybody else did in the state, except for people that wanted to open up their homes, put a roof over these child's heads and a warm meal. If you list, I still have I'll send it to all of you guys. I have the meeting that took place with this, and there were 3 women that spoke against this and that voted correctly, and they were appalled that this went through from a subset of the legislature, which on its surface is unconstitutional anyway. Biological parents do not lose medical decision-making simply because their child enters foster care. Loss of a medical decision-making requires a statutory provision or a court order. This proposed rule strips the religious vaccine exemption from these individuals, resulting in conflict with the constitutional protections and the RSA 141C20C exemptions. I'm going to say an aside again. The previous testimony said, they had those religious exemptions. They did not have those religious exemptions. If you read this, it basically denies every right that they had. This is the reason why many of us spoke against this strongly, including former Representative, now State Senator Timothy Lang. So ask him about this. He knows this very well. There is no statutory authority to impose vaccine mandates on adults in New Hampshire. This basically made that the case. Adopting this rule would throw the foster family program into chaos and put foster children back into harm's way. So that was my testimony almost 3 years ago. And I'm so sad that this stain took place. The Senate now has the opportunity to right this grave mistake that took place. And I hope you guys do the right thing.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Senator Abar.
Thank you. So for the record, you support this bill?
I do.
All right. And follow up?
Follow up?
And this passed the House on consent?
Correct.
And last one.
Follow up?
Does that happen often?
No, it actually doesn't.
Thank
So this was unanimous.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative? Senator Bradley has a question.
So
As
thank you very much, Representative. So if I've understood the testimony in opposition to this bill, if it seems like it's in the last sentence that was added in the amendment that starts no provision of the subdivision. If on line 12, after the word vaccination, we added a reference to 141C20, which is the religious exemption, and wouldn't that solve, at least in your opinion, the problem that the department posed? Because then it would ensure that the same exceptions would apply, right? But it wouldn't be broader than the exemptions that we currently have if we added that reference.
So no provisions. Yes, but if you currently, there is no statutory authority at all in the state for adults in New Hampshire. So in a sense, you could put that in there, but it really, 141C20 really only applies for children.
School age
Yes.
kids, right?
So this line that's in there, in a sense, doesn't even need to be in there unfortunately it does because of what happened when this went through is a rule. So, in all actuality, we should just kind of follow what the current law is, but we didn't, and then this was passed. So that line kind of should stay, even though once this is passed, in a sense, it wipes out what was done. In a sense, it clears the slate. So that really wouldn't need to be in there once this is truly passed.
Thank you.
My name is Larissa Trexler. I'm a registered nurse, and I'm here in support of HB 408. This will be very quick testimony. This is discrimination on a segment of the population, period. And the state has muddied this conversation, but I'm not going to repeat testimony that was just given. I think Representative Potenza did clear things up on that. But well, this is about the foster families and the foster, the children that are in that home that are not the foster children. As a nurse and advocate working with many foster families, I can attest that foster children have been negatively impacted by this, and that the blows to these foster children that already are having a hard enough time, it has been irreparable for some. So the foster families that I asked to testify today are not here. They're struggling with balancing and juggling their schedules, and with concerns about what impact, how this is impacted by their relationships with the organizers of the foster program. So I can't even name names, but thank you. I ask that you support HB 408, and that's really it. I don't think I'm going to take questions. Larissa, Larisa, Trexler, Trexler. I'm a registered nurse since 1995.
Is there anyone here that would like to speak on 408 but was not given the opportunity?
Thank you.
With that, I will close the hearing on House Bill 408. And since we've already exec'd the bills that we're going to exec,
We adjourn.
Second.
well, I just want to reiterate,
Oh, sorry.
we,
I thought you were looking for that motion.
no, we won't be, I don't think we need to meet next week. We'll just meet the week, wait, what week is that? We'll meet just to exact what bills we have left. All right? So with that. All right, and second, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Better not say yes. Okay. Yeah. I was going to, yeah.